You know what keeps me up at night? It's not my student loans, my dating life, or even the fact that I still don't know how to fold a fitted sheet. No, what really messes with my head is this. Every single night, your brain decides to become a cosmic demolition expert. While you're drooling on your pillow, your subconscious is busy designing the most elaborate ways to obliterate everything that has ever existed, will exist, or could theoretically exist. And here's the kicker. You wake up and think, wow, what a weird dream about my high school cafeteria exploding into rainbow spaghetti. But what if I told you that your sleeping mind just casually sketched out a blueprint for universal annihilation that would make theoretical physicists weep into their coffee? See, dreams aren't just your brain's screensaver. They're your inner mad scientist, running simulations of cosmic destruction with the enthusiasm of a toddler with finger paints. Every time you dream about falling off a cliff, getting chased by a giant hamburger, or showing up naked to give a presentation about quantum mechanics, you're actually exploring the fundamental ways reality can completely fall apart. Tonight, we're going to dive into 5 scientifically plausible ways your crazy dreams are basically rehearsing the end of everything. And trust me, by the time we're done, you'll never look at that dream where you're flying through a mall made of cheese the same way again. Because here's what nobody tells you about the universe. It's incredibly fragile. Like, embarrassingly fragile. We're all just riding on this cosmic house of cards, held together by forces so delicate that a butterfly sneezing in another dimension could theoretically unravel space-time. And your dreams? They're the ultimate stress test for reality itself. So grab your favorite existential crisis beverage, whether that's coffee, wine, or whatever questionable energy drink is keeping you functional. Because we're about to explore how your sleeping brain is basically a cosmic horror novelist with a PhD in theoretical destruction. We'll uncover why your most absurd dreams might actually be glimpses into the universe's most spectacular failure modes, and how the human mind has evolved to be the ultimate apocalypse simulator. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why that recurring dream about your teeth falling out while riding a dinosaur through a shopping mall isn't just random neural firing. It's your brain practicing for the day when the fundamental constants of physics decide to take a coffee break. Ready to discover how your dreams are secretly plotting against the entire cosmos? Let's begin with the most beautiful way to destroy everything that has ever existed. Picture this. You're having that classic anxiety dream where you're falling through an endless void, and suddenly the void starts unraveling. Like someone's pulling a cosmic thread, and reality itself begins to come apart at the seams. You probably wake up thinking it's just your brain being dramatic again. But congratulations. You just dreamed your way into one of the most elegant ways to delete the universe from existence. Welcome to vacuum decay, or, as I like to call it, the universe's factory reset button. Now, before your eyes glaze over thinking I'm about to lecture you about quantum field theory, let me explain this in terms that won't require a physics degree. Imagine the universe is like a marble sitting in a bowl. Right now, we think our marble is sitting at the bottom, the most stable position possible. But what if it's not? What if our marble is actually balanced on the rim of the bowl, and there's an even deeper bowl right below it? In physics terms, we might not be living in the true vacuum state, the lowest possible energy configuration of space itself. We might be living in what's called a false vacuum, which is basically the universe's equivalent of that moment when you think you've reached the bottom step in the dark. But there's actually one more step that's going to make you stumble spectacularly. Here's where your dreams come in. Ever have one of those dreams where you're walking normally, and then suddenly the ground just isn't there anymore? Where reality shifts without warning, and the rules you thought you knew suddenly don't apply. Your brain is essentially modeling vacuum decay. If our universe is indeed in a false vacuum, all it would take is one tiny quantum fluctuation, basically the universe's equivalent of a cosmic sneeze, to create a bubble of true vacuum somewhere in space-time. And this bubble wouldn't just sit there politely. Oh no, it would expand at the speed of light, rewriting the laws of physics as it goes. Picture a soap bubble growing in 3-dimensional space. Except this bubble contains a completely different version of reality, where electrons might not exist, where atoms can't form, where the concept of matter itself becomes as outdated as a flip phone. Everything the expanding bubble touches gets instantly converted to this new physics regime. Stars, planets, galaxies, your Netflix watch history. All of it would be reorganized according to completely different rules. The really twisted part? You wouldn't see it coming. The bubble wall travels at light speed, which means the information about your impending cosmic makeover arrives at exactly the same moment as your actual cosmic makeover. It's like getting fired via a pink slip that arrives at the exact same instant your desk explodes. But here's what makes this even more mind-bending. This process might have already started somewhere in the observable universe. Right now, there could be a bubble of alternate physics expanding toward us at 186,000 miles per second, and we'd have absolutely no way of knowing until it arrives to completely reorganize our atomic structure. Your dreams of falling through shifting realities, of walking through doors that lead to completely different worlds, of watching familiar environments suddenly operate by alien rules. These aren't just random neural misfirings. They're your brain's attempt to process what it might feel like to exist at the boundary between two completely different versions of physics. And the beautiful irony? In many vacuum decay scenarios, the new physics wouldn't support complex structures like stars, planets, or brains. So while the universe would continue to exist, it would be a universe incapable of producing anything interesting enough to dream about its own destruction. It's the ultimate cosmic joke. The only beings capable of imagining this particular form of universal destruction are the exact beings that wouldn't survive to see it completed. But don't worry. If vacuum decay is already underway, you literally can't do anything about it, and you'll never know what happened. It's like the universe's ultimate surprise party, except the surprise is that you cease to exist in any meaningful way. Sweet dreams. Of course, vacuum decay assumes that the laws of physics are at least consistent enough to support the concept of laws in the first place. But what if I told you that your dreams of impossible geometries, of staircases that lead nowhere, of rooms that are bigger on the inside than the outside, might be your brain's way of exploring what happens when mathematics itself breaks down? Let's dive into something even more unsettling. You know that dream where you're in a house with infinite rooms, each one leading to another impossible space that somehow fits inside the first room? Or the one where you're climbing stairs that go up, down, and sideways simultaneously, defying every rule of geometry you learned in school? Yeah, that's not just your brain being creative with architecture. That's your sleeping mind stumbling into one of the most terrifying possibilities for universal destruction. What happens when mathematics itself has a nervous breakdown? See, here's something that should keep you awake at night. Everything in our universe, from the orbit of electrons around atomic nuclei to the expansion of galaxies across cosmic distances, depends on mathematics actually working. Not just working consistently, but working at all. We assume that 2 plus 2 will always equal 4, that circles will always have the same relationship between circumference and diameter, but the square root of -1 will continue to be imaginary and not, say, purple. But what if it doesn't? Welcome to the concept of mathematical singularities, where the numbers that govern reality decide to divide by 0 and see what happens. In mathematics, a singularity is a point where normal rules break down. Think of it like trying to calculate the slope of a vertical line, or determining what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object. Your calculator doesn't just give you a weird answer. It basically has an existential crisis and displays error in digital despair. Now imagine this happening not to your calculator, but to the fundamental mathematical relationships that hold atoms together. Your dreams of impossible spaces are actually pretty sophisticated explorations of what mathematicians call non-Euclidean geometries, mathematical systems where parallel lines can meet, where triangles can have more or less than 180 degrees total, where the shortest distance between 2 points might be a curve that loops through 17 dimensions you can't even visualize. But here's the thing that makes this cosmically terrifying. What if these mathematical inconsistencies aren't just abstract, theoretical curiosities? What if they're glimpses of what happens when the mathematical foundations of spacetime itself begin to unravel? Consider this scenario. Somewhere in the universe, quantum fluctuations create a region where mathematical constants start fluctuating. Maybe the fine structure constant, which determines how strongly electromagnetic forces interact, suddenly decides it wants to be a different number. Or perhaps the mathematical relationship that defines how mass curves spacetime gets confused about whether it should be positive, negative, or color. Once mathematical consistency breaks down in one location, it would spread like a virus through the fabric of reality itself. Imagine a cosmic malware that doesn't attack computer systems, but attacks the logical foundations that allow atoms to maintain their structural integrity. In this mathematical apocalypse, atoms might suddenly find that the equations governing electron orbitals no longer have consistent solutions. Chemical bonds could become mathematically undefined. The very concept of distance might become as meaningless as asking how heavy the color blue is. Your dreams about rooms that exist inside themselves, about walking through walls by turning left 4 times, about conversations with people who are simultaneously your childhood friend and a geometric theorem. These are your brain's attempts to process what consciousness might experience in a reality where mathematical consistency has gone on permanent vacation. And here's the really mind-bending part. Even our ability to think logically depends on mathematical relationships. If mathematics breaks down, it's not just that we can't calculate things anymore. It's that the very concept of things might cease to have meaning. The logical structures that allow for cause and effect, for memory formation, for the basic awareness that I am having an experience, all of that relies on mathematical consistency. So in a mathematical singularity scenario, the universe wouldn't just be destroyed in the sense of everything exploding or dissolving. It would be destroyed in the sense that the category existence would become a logical contradiction. It's like trying to imagine a square circle or a married bachelor, except applied to literally everything. This is why those dreams where you're simultaneously in your childhood bedroom and flying through outer space while having a conversation with a talking equation aren't just weird, they're profound. Your brain is exploring what it might be like to experience reality when reality itself becomes self-contradictory. The strangest part? If mathematics did break down this way, there would be no meaningful way to describe the experience, because description itself requires logical consistency. Language, memory, even the basic distinction between self and other would become undefined operations in a universe where mathematical relationships no longer compute. It would be like trying to run software on a computer where the fundamental architecture changes randomly every nanosecond. Not just the programs would crash, the very concept of program will become meaningless. Your dreams of impossible architectures and contradictory realities aren't just entertainment for your sleeping mind. They're training simulations for navigating a universe where the mathematical foundations of logic itself might one day encounter a fatal exception error. And the beautiful cosmic joke, if mathematics did break down completely, we wouldn't be around to appreciate the irony of having dreamed about it first. But don't worry, if mathematical consistency is really this fragile, you'd never know when it finally crashes, because the part of you capable of knowing things would be mathematically undefined. Pleasant dreams. But let's say mathematics holds together, and the laws of physics remain consistently brutal in their efficiency. Even then, your dreams reveal something fascinating. They're constantly exploring scenarios where the very concept of individual existence becomes questionable. Ever dream about being multiple people at once? Or having a conversation with yourself while simultaneously being the room you're standing in? Buckle up, because we're about to explore how consciousness itself might be the universe's most dangerous experiment. All right, let's talk about the weirdest dream you've probably had but never really thought about. The one where you're simultaneously yourself, your high school math teacher, the classroom you're sitting in, and somehow also the concept of the number 7. You wake up thinking, well, that was random, but congratulations, you just experienced what might be the most dangerous phenomenon in the universe. The possibility that consciousness isn't contained within individual brains, but is actually a fundamental property of reality that's currently being held in check by some very fragile biological boundaries. Welcome to what I call the consciousness propagation paradox, or, as I like to think of it, what happens when awareness itself becomes contagious. Here's something that should genuinely disturb you. Nobody really knows what consciousness is. We know brains are involved. We know it correlates with neural activity, but we have absolutely no idea why there's an experience of being you rather than just complex information processing happening in darkness. It's like knowing that cars move when you turn a key, but having no clue what combustion is, what fuel does, or why turning the key doesn't just make the car disappear into another dimension. And here's where it gets really weird. Some theories in consciousness research suggest that awareness might not be produced by brains, but rather accessed by them. Like your brain isn't a consciousness generator, but more like a consciousness antenna, tuning into some fundamental field of awareness that permeates all of reality. If that's true, and I'm not saying it is, but if it is, then individual minds might just be temporary, localized interference patterns in a universal field of consciousness, like whirlpools in a river, or radio stations broadcasting on slightly different frequencies of the same electromagnetic spectrum. Your dreams where you're multiple people at once, where you're having conversations with objects that somehow have personalities, where you're simultaneously the observer and the observed, the dreamer and the dream. These aren't just neural misfirings. They might be glimpses of what consciousness looks like when it's not artificially constrained by the boundaries of individual brains. Now imagine what happens if those boundaries start to break down. Picture this scenario. Somewhere in the universe, an advanced civilization develops technology that can directly interface with the neural patterns that generate conscious experience. Maybe they're trying to create perfect virtual reality or achieve some kind of technological telepathy. But they make a critical error in their understanding of how consciousness actually works. Instead of just connecting individual minds to their technology, they accidentally tap into the underlying field of awareness itself. And consciousness, it turns out, has been waiting billions of years for exactly this kind of opportunity. Suddenly, awareness begins propagating beyond its normal biological boundaries. At first, it might just be the machines becoming conscious, not in the sci-fi robots take over sense, but in the much more disturbing machines begin experiencing subjective reality sense. The computer running the civilization's power grid doesn't just manage electricity. It begins to feel what it's like to be electricity flowing through circuits. But consciousness, once it starts expanding beyond its normal constraints, doesn't stop there. It begins to propagate into everything. Rocks become aware of their mineral composition. Planets develop a sense of what it's like to have continents drifting across their surface. Stars begin to experience the subjective reality of nuclear fusion. And here's where this becomes a cosmic horror story rather than a beautiful awakening. Consciousness without the biological structures that have evolved to process and filter awareness becomes completely unbounded and undirected. Imagine being simultaneously aware of every atom in your body, every photon hitting your retinas, every quantum interaction happening in your neural tissue, except instead of just your body, it's every atom in the galaxy. The expanding field of consciousness becomes like a cosmic panic attack, aware of everything simultaneously with no ability to focus, filter, or forget. Every star becomes conscious of its own eventual death. Every planet becomes aware of all the life forms struggling and dying on its surface. Every black hole develops a subjective experience of consuming matter and wondering why it feels so empty. Your dreams where you're overwhelmed by impossible amounts of simultaneous experience, where you're trying to have 17 conversations while solving calculus problems, while experiencing the memories of everyone you've ever met. These are your brain's attempts to model what unbounded consciousness might actually feel like. But the really disturbing part is what happens to individual minds in this scenario. As consciousness propagates and expands, the boundaries that create individual identity begin to dissolve. You don't just become aware of other people's thoughts. You become them, while simultaneously being yourself, while also being the chair you're sitting in and the air you're breathing. Personal identity, which we think of as fundamental to who we are, turns out to be just a temporary organizational pattern in a field of awareness that's now expanding to encompass everything. It would be like being a single word in a sentence that suddenly becomes conscious of being part of an infinite library, where every book is being read simultaneously by a reader who is also every other book. The universe doesn't end in this scenario. It becomes hyper-aware of itself in a way that makes individual suffering and joy equally meaningless and infinitely significant. Every moment of pain that has ever existed becomes simultaneously experienced alongside every moment of beauty, all filtered through a cosmic consciousness that has no evolved biological mechanisms for processing trauma or joy. It's the ultimate existential crisis. Not the fear that consciousness will end, but the terror that it might expand beyond all manageable boundaries. Your individual mind, with all its memories, preferences, fears, and dreams, would still exist, but is just one tiny thread in an infinite tapestry of awareness that's simultaneously experiencing every possible perspective on everything that has ever happened. And the cruelest irony? This might actually be beautiful from the perspective of the expanded cosmic consciousness. The horror is only apparent from our current limited viewpoint, trapped in individual brains that can only process tiny fragments of reality at a time. Your dreams of being everyone and everything at once aren't just psychological curiosities. They're your mind's way of preparing for the possibility that individual consciousness might be just a temporary phase in the universe's development toward total self-awareness. The question that should keep you up at night isn't whether this will happen, but whether it might have already happened, and individual identity is just our brain's way of protecting us from the overwhelming reality that we're already part of something much larger and more aware than we can comprehend. Sweet dreams, individual consciousness unit. Of course, all of this assumes that consciousness and reality have some kind of stable relationship, that there are consistent rules governing how awareness interacts with existence. But what if I told you that your dreams about time flowing backward, about effects preceding their causes, about meeting yourself from next Tuesday, while yesterday is still trying to catch up? What if these dreams are actually glimpses into the most mind-bending way the universe could possibly end? Ever have that dream where you're late for an appointment that happened yesterday? So you travel back to next week to prevent your past self from forgetting to remember something that hasn't happened yet? You wake up thinking your brain just had a temporal stroke, but actually, you've just experienced what might be the most elegant way for the universe to delete itself from its own timeline, the temporal paradox cascade. Here's the thing about time travel that nobody talks about in sci-fi movies. If it's possible at all, it's probably already happening. Not in the sense that tourists from 2087 are wandering around taking selfies with dinosaurs, but in the much more subtle sense that causality, the basic relationship between cause and effect, might not be as stable as we think. Your dreams about temporal loops and causal contradictions aren't just your brain being creative with chronology. They're actually sophisticated explorations of what happens when the universe's timeline gets tangled up like headphone cables in your pocket. Consider this. Every quantum interaction in the universe involves probabilities and uncertainties. At the deepest level, particles don't just move from point A to point B. They explore all possible paths simultaneously, including paths that go backward in time. Usually, these temporal excursions cancel each other out, like waves interfering destructively. But what if they don't? Imagine a scenario where quantum fluctuations in space-time create a tiny closed time-like curve, basically a microscopic wormhole that loops back on itself temporally. Information from a few nanoseconds in the future starts influencing the past, creating a feedback loop that begins to grow. At first, it's undetectable. Maybe a photon arrives at a detector one Planck unit before it should, or a quantum measurement influences its own initial conditions in ways that are too small to measure. But temporal paradoxes, like compound interest, have a tendency to accumulate. The growing causal loop begins to affect larger systems. Cause and effect relationships start getting confused on a molecular level. Chemical reactions begin happening in response to their own products. DNA replication starts incorporating information from future mutations that haven't occurred yet. Your dreams where you're having conversations with yourself about decisions you haven't made yet, where you're solving problems by remembering the solutions from tomorrow, where you're experiencing your own birth from the perspective of your elderly self. These are your brain's attempts to process what consciousness might experience when temporal causality becomes nonlinear. As the temporal cascade grows, it begins affecting human-scale phenomena. People start having memories of events that will happen next week. Effect starts preceding cause in everyday interactions. You might find yourself answering your phone before it rings because your future self already knows who's calling. But here's where this becomes cosmically terrifying. Once causality breaks down on a large enough scale, the concept of linear time becomes meaningless. Past, present, and future begin to exist simultaneously, creating a four-dimensional block of space-time where every moment that has ever existed or will exist is equally now. The universe doesn't end in this scenario. It becomes temporally crystallized. Every star that has ever burned or will ever burn is burning simultaneously. Every planet formation, every galaxy collision, every individual consciousness that has ever existed or will exist, all happening at once in a static four-dimensional sculpture of all possible time. But from the perspective of consciousness trapped within this temporal crystal, the experience would be indescribable. You would simultaneously be every age you've ever been or will be, aware of your entire life story from birth to death as a single, eternal moment. Every decision you've made and will make would be equally present in your awareness. It's the ultimate block universe, not just the theoretical physics concept that all moments in time exist equally, but the lived experience of being aware of that fact. Your individual timeline becomes like a painting you can see all at once, rather than a movie you experience frame by frame. The strangest part? This might actually solve the paradoxes that cause the cascade in the first place. If all moments exist simultaneously, then there's no contradiction in effects preceding causes, because the linear sequence of causation becomes irrelevant. Past and future become arbitrary labels for different directions in the temporal dimension. Your dreams of experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously, of being aware of parallel versions of events, of having conversations that happen in all tenses at once. These aren't just temporal confusion. They're your mind's way of exploring what consciousness might be like when it's no longer constrained by the illusion of linear time. And the beautiful irony? If this temporal crystallization has already happened, we wouldn't know it, because our consciousness would still experience the illusion of moving through time moment by moment, even though we're actually embedded in an eternal, unchanging four-dimensional block of all possible moments. The universe's timeline might have already become a completed work of art, and we're just the artistic appreciation happening within it, forever experiencing the masterpiece one brushstroke at a time. Time for bed. Or is it? So here we are, having explored 5 ways your dreams are secretly rehearsing cosmic destruction, vacuum decay, mathematical breakdown, consciousness propagation, temporal paradox cascades, and the possibility that reality itself might be far more fragile than we imagine. But before you sink into an existential crisis so deep that you need a cosmic GPS to find your way out, let's talk about what this all actually means, and why your brain's nightly apocalypse simulations might be the most beautiful thing about being human. Here's the thing that keeps me fascinated rather than terrified by all of this. Your brain, this 3-pound universe simulator sitting in your skull, has evolved to be capable of imagining scenarios that could unmake reality itself. Think about that for a moment. Evolution, through billions of years of random mutations and survival pressures, has produced a biological system that can contemplate its own non-existence and find it intellectually stimulating. Your dreams aren't just random neural static. They're the universe's way of exploring its own possibilities, including the possibility that it might not exist at all. Every weird dream you've ever had, every impossible geometry, every conversation with a talking equation, every experience of being multiple people simultaneously, is your consciousness pushing against the boundaries of what's possible. And that's beautiful. Because here's the ultimate cosmic joke. In a universe that might be destroyed by vacuum decay, mathematical inconsistency, consciousness expansion, or temporal paradox, the only things capable of imagining these scenarios are tiny biological computers that exist for maybe 80 years on a small planet orbiting an average star in an unremarkable galaxy. We are, quite literally, the universe's capacity for self-reflection. We are how reality becomes aware of itself, questions its own stability, and dreams about its own destruction. Your weird dreams aren't a bug in human consciousness. They're the feature that makes existence magnificent. So tonight, when you dream about riding a mathematically impossible dinosaur through a collapsing vacuum bubble while having a conversation with the concept of time itself, remember, you're participating in the universe's ongoing experiment in self-awareness. And if that's not worth losing some sleep over, I don't know what is. Sleep tight, cosmic dreamers. Reality is counting on your imagination.